IndieSeen is back. It's been a
Ooh.
little while, and I'm glad to be returning with some very special guests. We of course have Sujewa, the regular co-host of the series, and we have once again Alia. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Just busy at the moment, but promoting this movie and first art show that I have coming up. So just a lot going on.
Busy
Your
lady.
first your first art show. Well, you'll have to tell us more about that, and if there's info we can share, I'll put it in the description. That's great. Is that when's that happening, and where is it?
That's happening September 7th, in Manhattan. So
Wow.
Yeah, you can email him info, then he can add it to the show's description.
Yes,
I
definitely.
projects coming out kind of at the same time, which makes me happy.
Awesome.
Awesome. Cool. All right. And
I
Sujiwa,
got some shaving done, making progress.
hey, I shaved today too, so we're all looking professional as can be. You're wearing a shirt with a collar,
That's
which
right.
I definitely think is fun.
Mm,
But we're here to not talk about fashion
right.
necessarily.
Or shaving.
We right. We are here to talk about your new movie, which is just out now on VOD, and we've got some big plans to discuss for its rollout theatrically and kind of some online screenings for the next, for the foreseeable future. But we'll talk about a lot of that as the show goes on. But that film, which you've been working on for a while, is the
20
sequel
months.
to. Yeah, it's how many months is it now?
20 months, 1 year and 8 months or so.
Wow.
These things
Um,
take time.
yes, they do. And this is a sequel to your previous film, The Secret Society for Slow Romance. Right now, you have. I'm going to try and get this right off the top of my head without looking at notes. The Secret Society for Slow Romance 2, Cosmic Disco Detective Rene, The Mystery of Immortal Time Travelers.
Correct.
That might be a record for longest title, and if not, certainly longest series of title cards on a
Hmm.
film, because each one of those gets its own title card, and one with crazy fancy 3D space age animation, which I appreciate. I thought that was a lot of fun.
That took a
um,
lot of time.
I imagine. Now, did you I don't want to sound insulting,
Sure.
but did you do that yourself, or did you hire someone like to do titles and effects
Yeah,
and
no,
stuff?
I did it myself. I like how it turned out. A mixture of old timey and indie look. Did you like the graphics or no?
I did.
Good, good.
I was that was a nice kind of surprise as the movie opened up, along with some of the. Well, first of all, we have, and we're not going to go full like spoilers or anything because people do need to discover this for themselves. But we open up with an Irma Vep homage, which is a lot of fun. And that's of course a film that we've talked about on this show.
Hmm.
We get some scenes of kind of like New York life, and some of that is not running in forward time motion, let's just say. And that's kind of surprising too, especially because some of it's subtle. You say like, wait a second, there are people in the background and they're moving backwards. What's that all about? And then we get these amazing opening titles. There's also some kind of special effects involving these immortal time travelers, and how they manifest in the world, in was it Sunset Park?
Hmm.
And yeah, that's sort of that's not even the setup. That's just some stuff that's happening in the movie. So Sajiro, why don't you set up the film? I know we kind of talked about its development, and you've dropped some hints about the story and the characters and the actors, over like the last year plus we've been talking about it. But yeah, set it up for us. What can people expect to see story wise from Cosmic Disco Detective Renee?
Awesome. Thanks a lot for having us on. As always, we like to come to you for some press. It's Meet the Press with Ian Simmons. Regardless of your take on the movie, always a fun show, and you ask interesting questions. So,
Mm,
this movie is a mainstream, accessible indie movie made with a minimal cast and crew, like some of my earlier movies. But if you like sci fi stories, you will be able to get into this, I think, and enjoy it. Basically, the story is in a certain dimension, we have Rene, who is a private detective, famous, and the government comes to him to help solve a case involving immortal time travelers. they are traveling back in time through our time period using a time bridge without permission, without consulting with us. So the government is worried it might be an invasion. They're thinking about attacking the time bridge, using nuclear weapons if they have to. But first, they want to consult with a very unusual detective to figure out if he can tell what's happening with the time travelers and if it's a threat that requires the use of nuclear weapons in Brooklyn, which can be a problem. So that's the main story. Then we have Rene's girlfriend, Allyson, who's an underground filmmaker working on her projects. And then we have a film historian, film critic named Chitrapati, which is the Sinhala word for cinema or movies, by the way. It's a Sri Lankan language. Um, also maybe Sanskrit. And she is writing a book about independent film in New York. She's interviewing Rene, who's also a filmmaker. And then we have the government agent, Itihasaya, which is another Sinhala word that I borrowed. That means history. It's one of the languages in Sri Lanka. And those are the four characters, but a lot happens in multiple dimensions, and a lot of interesting ideas are taken a look at, and hopefully it connects with people. Jamie Top loves it, so that's the only response we have so far. So we're good so far.
All right.
So far.
Now, quick question. Because each of the characters, we get a little bit of a title card for them too.
Mm-hmm.
Did I see this right? Itihasa, the government worker, wasn't she also a filmmaker? I thought I saw that there was also an independent film. Yeah, like so. I think literally every character in this movie is an independent filmmaker of some note. That was kind of fun.
Thank you. And this all happened because the script evolved so much. There was filmmaking related stuff for those characters that didn't make it to the final version of the story. So, but the title, the character design is still there, the character profile is still there. So maybe in the future we'll see some movies with those characters and their films. But yeah, the script went through a massive change from when I first started 1 year and 8 months ago to when I finished it like 4 months ago. Alia, what were you going to say?
Oh, just that this happens to be a universe in which being a filmmaker is just the norm.
Yeah, and I think that kind of plays into some of the themes and like the messaging, I guess, throughout the film. You mentioned that the script kind of evolved and changed with some of those other storylines that got axed. Did you film any of that, or was that strictly on the page and then you had to cut it out once you came to making the film, and maybe we'll revisit that later? Or was there stuff on the cutting room floor?
Well, on this one, instead of having it be wall-to-wall conversation as it was in Slow Romance, the first movie, I wanted to use shots of the city and the shots of characters over narration, which is an idea that came from Chantal Ackerman's movie News from Home. A great documentary, check it out, to cover some of the stories. So I could have included some of the stories about Itihase and Chhatrapati and their filmmaking one way or another, either as live, actual action or discussions or narration. But ultimately, I took those out in favor of just focusing on the time travelers and secondary story primarily being Allison's story, and the third story being the film critic story.
Now, as far as Rene and Allyson, we first met them in, of course, the movie that preceded this, because this is a sequel. But Rene, in particular, is very different than when we first met him. I don't know that there was. Of course, he's the happiest man in North America, and he is a filmmaker, and he has some degree of influence. but the whole idea of him being the cosmic disco detective, literally tapping into, I guess, the vibes of the universe or the cosmos, which happens to be set to disco music, and that helps him to solve, mysteries. You've dealt with a detective character before, I believe it was in Breakthrough Weekend, one of your earlier films. And now you're kind of revisiting this idea now. I got to ask, this might help me unpack some of my questions and feelings about the film. Is this the same Rene that we met in the first film, or is this sort of an alternate dimension take on the character?
This is a different Rene. This is it slowly is revealed in the movie, but not everyone will listen to this discussion, so we can just talk about it to make it clear. Um, so the Rene and Allyson we're seeing in this movie are in a different dimension. They're not the Rene and Allyson in the slow romance one dimension, but they share a lot of similarities. Except this Rene is a private investigator with a lot of experience, an unusual private investigator with a lot of experience. That's one of the primary differences, I think.
Okay. Now, do we I'm trying not to get into spoiler territory.
Sure,
Maybe we'll do some spoiler stuff later. I can put the banner up and everything and tell
sure,
people skip to, point X if you
right.
want to come out of spoilers. But for right now, do we get a glimpse of, say, Rene and Allison version 1 from the first movie at all? Do
Yes.
we cross
Well,
we do cross over. Okay.
yeah, we get a lot of glimpses of lots of different Renes and Allisons, and just the landscape in various dimensions. I had to stop counting at one point. There are many dimensions that we show in the movie. So whenever it slows down, that's a different dimension. Whenever it speeds up, that's a different dimension. Each dimension has a different visual look. So if you were to sit down with a piece of paper, you can probably map out which dimension we're in. But the primary dimension of this movie is usually greenish and doesn't have a lot of soft focus. So it's normal focus with a little bit of soft focus, but usually greenish.
Okay.
The slow romance one universe is dimension is mostly bluish. It's the look. I used actual footage from the previous movie to try to get to that look. That one was color graded to be mostly blue.
Yeah, because that was one of my that's why I asked the question, is because I didn't pick up honestly on any of those visual cues that you mentioned. Um, I noticed that there were changes in, the coloration and the treatment of the film, I guess. But as far as their significance, I don't know. The characters just seemed very inconsistent throughout the film, and maybe that is because we are looking into different dimensional windows. But as someone who's just like sitting down and watching it, I didn't pick up on that
Mhm.
like key difference at all.
Well,
um,
it was spelled out at the end. At the
I
end,
I don't. By that point, I was so I don't know.
you were
Confused
lost.
isn't. No, it wasn't confusion. I was just kind of checked out because honestly, some of and one of my, I think, kind of issues with the film is the forward momentum of the story. I feel like the revelation at the end feels kind of not tacked on is the wrong word.
Mhm.
But when we realize the truth about what these time travelers are, or an aspect of their truth, I was convinced that it was all false, and then it turns out to be, this. It's hard to talk about this without getting
Yes,
spoilery. Sorry,
you saw
but
that one shot in the end, towards the end, right?
yes,
Good.
and up until that point, I was like, I don't. I think this guy might just be nuts, because the story itself, the supporting material of the story, like the whole government story, none of it made sense to me. Because I'm like, I don't know what reality this is where the government is doing what it's doing and treating the situation where it's, the way it's treating it. So yeah, I'm like, none of this matters. I don't care. And I'm kind of glad it's done.
Leo, what were you gonna say?
I actually, okay, so I didn't realize this before. The To me, the idea of the two characters having names that are like Sri Lankan and Sanskrit words for something that actually applies to the character actually brings up the suggestion that they could be figments of Rene's imagination, and I kind of like that.
Good. No, they're not. I use those words because those words are not understood by an American audience. So
Yeah.
they just sound like foreign names. But no, no. The way, I mean, my take on it is they're real. So, but different viewers will have different takes. But uh, uh, interesting that you said that, Ian, because a programmer for a major festival who's a friend of mine took a look at it. He said a lot of weird stuff happening, but everything felt real, even the government stuff, blah blah blah. So um, I don't know if you saw No Bears. Did you see No Bears?
Yeah, we talked about it.
That's right. So that
Yeah.
was one of my inspirations. I like how a lot of weird things happen in that movie from our experience. I mean, everything that happens in that movie is weird to us because our lives are a lot different. But all of it feels kind of real. So I was going for that. So if you were to watch it with the understanding this is a completely different dimension, it might work better. And also for people who haven't seen the first one, this might work because this is just what they know about, these characters.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about different dimensions, that could mean anything. As we saw in, Doctor Strange 2, there
Sure.
could be a dimension where, or, everything everywhere all at once. There could be a dimension where people have hot dogs for fingers. I mean, it doesn't, it's almost a cheat to say, well, it happened in another dimension. Things work differently there. I don't know
Yeah,
in what
but things
dimension.
work a lot like our own universe in the dimension that we see in the Rene story. I mean, clandestine military operations happen all the time.
Right. But when there is an observable phenomenon, even in the movies,
Yes.
right, where you've got strange orange lights and sounds appearing regularly
Hmm.
in one location and they can't be explained by anything, you're going to have more than one person noticing it.
Hmm.
You're going to have probably the area cordoned off to be investigated by, people in, I mean, I'm looking at like ET or something like that, people in hazmat suits coming to check this out. You're talking about possibly launching nukes at it. You're not going to trust all of that to one detective standing around a park, like dancing to the disco music in his head. And
Hmm.
at the end, determining, well, it's not really a threat. How do they know that? They have it based on the authority of one guy, and they said, well, we don't have to launch nukes at it because it's not a threat, but it's still a phenomenon, right? It doesn't go away.
But
I
phenomenons are used by the government or everyone, really. Lots of different organizations are explained away all the time. The current UFO phenomenon is one thing that's been explained away as weather balloons and lots of other things.
Well, that's
However,
different though. That's different because you're talking about lots of different people seeing different things in different places, but this is a specific phenomenon happening over an extended enough period of time that the government notices, figures out who's going to go talk to the one person they discover or decide to have investigate it.
one of
They
many.
give them time to investigate.
He could be one of many experts. Also, uh, another aspect of stuff like this is usually the government or any organization needs a way to justify what they were going to do anyway, right? So, like in Oppenheimer, um, it was revealed that the government was going to drop the bombs regardless of what the scientists recommended, but they got the scientists to recommend to drop the bomb on Japan just so it looks good for their records. So, I mean, that kind of thing happens all the time.
How does that apply to this movie? I don't understand.
Well, it could be that one faction of the government wants to use weapons on this, which is on this phenomenon or this time bridge, which they determine to be real, and someone else doesn't, so they can use outside consultants to move one option forward and one option back.
Where is that in the story?
It's not in the story.
I read
Okay. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Aaliyah.
I read the entire thing, you know, very much the thing that is consistent throughout all the movies that I've worked with Sujewa on is that even if they do take places in different universes, the universes are tied together by being both small and absurd. They don't make that much sense, but they're kind of like they come at you from left field, and part of the movie that it is that it makes you kind of be like, what?
To me,
I
the universe makes sense, but you know, that's just me.
Well, I understand. Look, I understand what you're saying, and I generally agree. Up the films of Sujiwas that I've watched up to this point, I think do follow those rules. Even something as absurd as Werewolf Ninja Philosopher, but I think that movie makes a lot more sense than Cosmic Disco Detective Rene because I think it has a clear sense of its own rules, and I think it has a clear understanding of. Sujiwa, you put this out as you framed this in the beginning as more of a mainstream accessible comedy. I don't really agree because I think people are going to be coming away and be like, okay, were there time travelers? Were they aliens? What did they want? Are they, we get a hint as to whether or not they're real at the end, but what does that even mean? Right? There's a
Well,
theory as to what they were here doing, possibly, but then if you look at this, this idea of, well, again, I don't want to give anything away as far as their motives that are kind of revealed possibly during the film. So we'll let people discover that on their own. But I'm watching this movie like intently looking for clues to this plot, and I'm just not seeing anything.
sure. So let's see how people respond. And some movies, like even the movies that you've dealt with in the past, um, Terrence Malick's, what was it, Knight of Cups, and a bunch of other movies, you had different takes a few months or years later. So let's see. Let's talk to like 100 people and see what happens.
Nope, that's totally fair.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, it could be um, the responses I've gotten from like a handful of people who've seen it. They generally get what the movie is doing, and they generally were entertained by it. So let's see. But it's cool that it's possible that some people just don't get the whole setup.
well, let me just ask you this because this is generally where I draw a distinction in terms of movies that are, a bit more ethereal or not like kind of laid out. Did you have an idea of what was going on? Did you flesh out this story as far as what the time travelers wanted to do and what they were doing? I understand that you kind of mapped out the dimensions in terms of like color grading and different kind of visual cues. But as far
That
as the
was
time travelers, hmm?
No, that stuff was later. No, the story was first. Ultimately, there is a clear story as to what the time travelers are doing and what, in my view, what the conclusion that Rene comes to is the correct conclusion, which which works for the story.
Okay.
That they are traveling through. I mean, things could change in the future. You know, they could be a threat, but let's see what I mean. So the at the end of the movie, he's like, "Let's see what's going to happen without giving away too much, and maybe not use the nuclear weapons in Brooklyn."
Yeah. Okay. I Based on that answer, I mean, I'm not meaning to doubt you, but that still does not sound as sure as
No, it's
as something that
100% plotted out. That was the first thing that was done before finishing the story.
okay. All right. Well, again, maybe other people see people are definitely going to see things differently than I do.
Sure.
Um,
Did
but
you read Jamie's review?
no.
Okay,
Um,
check it out for alternate take. I told her nothing, except bits and pieces that I posted on Twitter. I sent her the movie, and I told her nothing. She came back with her interpretation of it, which was pretty close to what I was thinking. And
okay.
same with another programmer. Alia got it, uh, and a couple other people have seen it. But check out her review, see if that makes sense. And
All right, and I'll go a step further. I'll link that down below too, so other people can kind of get, once they go watch it, they can come back here and watch this conversation and get all the takes.
right.
Um,
But Aaliyah did a great job. Can't make these movies without her.
No, I think that was the thing that I think I responded to, I think the most was whatever dimension I'm watching you guys, you guys in, your relationship, I think, in this movie is, I think it's a clearer vision of what you wanted these characters to be than
Previous one.
than the first one. And
Yeah,
that's possibly because these characters have been, in each other's lives, again, across dimensions perhaps. So they're a bit more comfortable, and I feel more comfortable, with them.
good.
So
I
yeah,
love
that's very cool. So go ahead.
So one of the criticisms we got in the last movie was that the couple didn't seem like a couple. So we worked this time rehearsals, yeah, and improvised scenes
Hmm.
to get these us to the point where we naturally seem like a couple who's been together for a couple of years. So I'm glad that worked. Good
Yeah.
job, Leo. There we go. Good
Yeah.
job.
So I want to ask you, Leah, about that. It hasn't, I feel like less time has possibly elapsed between making these films than Alia and or Allyson and Rene have been together. Like Sujewa just mentioned a couple years. I know the movie has been kind of gestating for a while in terms of being written and then shot and all that business. But in terms of revisiting Allyson, how did you like approach her this time now that you've kind of been in her skin for the first film and you're, coming back at it 2 years later in film time?
Toward the end, on the final filming day, I think I actually was going with the idea that this wasn't quite the same Allyson, regardless, but also even starting out from the beginning, it was the character in a different place mentally and in her life because uh, previously this character was very stressed out. She had a day job and was lonely, and a lot of the reason I think they didn't seem like a couple in the first movie is because that was their first few dates,
Mhm.
kind of hesitant and during the COVID lockdowns, and they were treating it as such. Um, and now everything's worked out. They have a whole ton of money, um, and Allison's able to focus on what she really likes to do, and just sort of relax more. So I was coming at the character from a different angle in the beginning. The thing is, we started filming for the new movie very shortly after
Mhm.
finished filming for the first one. So all of the B-roll footage was filmed long before any of the dialogue.
Mhm.
Um, so it was just sort of, and all that was sort of going with having Allyson being very happy and that things were going well. So that was and then from there, the scenes where I'm talking into my phone, those are all improvisation. So it was basically like Suji would give me a prompt. How does Allyson feel about her film career right now, about having money, about living in New York City? It was just different prompts.
But
So
that material came from the last like
yeah,
4 years of stuff that we've been talking about, and also from the first movie. So
and,
I didn't push the idea that this is a different Allison uh,
mhm,
while we were filming,
mhm.
but we knew that she was in a different place.
Yeah,
So so the so in some aspects, this Rene and Allison are not super different from Dimension One. The Dimension Three Rene and Allison I'm working on now, they're going to be very different from the Dimension One and Two. So there'll be a clear difference between the three pairs. But no, she played Allison as just the same type of Allison, just maybe a year after they've been living together.
That's and this is another one of those, I guess, why I thought there might be peeking across dimensions, because in one of these kind of talking into the phone recorder sessions, you're talking about struggling for, money, and, you don't like having to pay rent. You're kind of iffy on, relationships, and a lot of other kind of gripes. And then later on, you're talking about how this is when you're kind of making reference to the Irma Vep type film that you're filming in the stairwell, and how you'd like to get, that kind of a costume that the actress wore in that film. Uh, and then you're like, wait, maybe I could just go to France tomorrow and buy it because I've got all the money that I need. Now, I understand, Sujewa, as you set it up, that these, I guess, are different dimensional
Yeah.
Allisons talking, right?
All those Allisons are in the main dimension of the story.
Okay, so do they take place at different times? Because she's complaining about not having enough money, and then
No,
20 minutes later,
not having enough money. Go ahead.
she's talking about like not wanting to have to pay rent, and there's all of this other like financial talk throughout the film that seems to come up against, now I've got all the money that I need.
She's
Right.
always had the money.
Okay,
What?
Yeah.
because I kept forgetting. First of all, remember, I was just this is all stuff that was coming out of my mind automatically. So sometimes I would start something and forget that both that this character had all the money she wanted. And
Yeah. So Ian, Leah, one thing. She was referring to how she felt earlier before she had the money. And then she was reflecting on how she had the money. Go ahead, Aaliyah.
right, but whenever that happened, the character corrects herself and actually starts talking about the struggles of finance, and then sort of catches herself and realizes, but wait, that doesn't even apply to her, and kind of laughing about it because it's new. And
Yeah, not to cut in, but I mean that I definitely picked up on that at the end of the film, right? But earlier on, there is definitely a speech where she's talking about the day job, the rent, the relationships, and the money.
That's the stuff that if you revisit that scene, you'll see she says, now I don't have to worry about that stuff. So to make it simpler, I believe all the dialogue in the movie, except that backwards talking scene, takes place in the main dimension of the movie. All the dialogue.
I didn't even as they're all the same. I did see it as different dimensions.
No, they're all the same. That's why they're in the movie. Otherwise, they would have cut out.
Differently, but but my interpretation was still that the characters are pursuing this ending poverty project in every dimension.
Yeah, there might be one Allison brief segment that's where we don't cut to another the shots of the city, a little bit out of focus, not out of focus, soft focus. That might be from another dimension, but like 90% of the dialogue is in the main dimension.
Okay.
Okay.
Anything that didn't fit the main story, I cut out, and anything that I put in that is from another dimension, we did a visual thing to it doesn't look like the main stuff.
Okay.
But one day we'll do a screening where I'm pointing out main dimension, alternate dimension, and Ian going nope, no.
No, I would not go to that screening. I'm sorry. I am generally not a fan of films that require, to me, a handbook to follow. And
this one doesn't.
I'm sitting here watching you guys talk about, well, I think this is from this dimension. You're like, no, it's from this dimension, and we cut this part out if it didn't work in that dimension. But I thought this was going on. This is fine, but I'm saying these are all the frustrations that I had watching the movie from start to finish, and trying to figure out, because aside from that one, when I guessed that there might have been peaks across dimensions, that was just like, maybe that's why none of this is making sense to me. But as just a viewer sitting down to watch this with the context of, I don't know if this immortal time traveler thing is actually affecting everything, because I still don't understand quite how time, things running backwards. It's a neat visual trick, but what that has to do with the actual story I'm watching.
It's
Um,
that was explained later. This is a spoiler, but
well, hold on. I can do this now.
sure.
Watch this.
Good.
Okay.
All right. So it was explained later in the movie that almost towards the end that all the backward stuff we're seeing, those are dreams that Allyson has. Where and then she talks about, I've been seeing these dreams.
Yes, right. But as I'm watching the film, right, I'm assuming that because we're talking about time travelers and we're watching things happen in reverse time,
Mm-hmm.
that has something to do with the time travelers that are in the title and kind of the heart of the forward propulsion of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
To find out later that they are dreams, and then to also find out that these interstitials are of Allyson, in the stairwell, these shots of her reading and these close-ups of her butt, which is kind of like it becomes a joke, right? That some of this is dreams, some of this is alternate looks of different dimensions, some of this is I don't know what, but there's this kind of like a visual melange playing out in front of me, and finding out in the third act that how this stuff is playing out. I'm sorry, I just can't. I mean,
It's a
by that point, right? But at this point, I don't feel like going back and figuring it all out again. I'm just kind of like throwing my hands up.
Sure.
And I was happy to see that at the 40-minute mark, we finally see the most prolific filmmaker in America finally like sitting down with a monitor and looks like editing or reviewing footage. Because there's a scene of the two of you like looking at a conversation scene. I guess I'm supposed to think that the Irma Vep scene, which was funny to me, but I don't know if it was funny to you or the characters. But you're like, yeah, I've got 50 minutes of me like going up and down the stairwells in this kind of catwalk. I don't know how this is a feature. That's still my same gripe I had from the first movie. Like, the amount of films that Allyson is supposed to have made in her career up to the point before you guys even started dating was something like, I don't know, 1,000 short films and 50 features or something like that. I don't know.
Maybe 20 features.
Okay. Yeah, that schedule, unless you're talking about literally, I'm going to film myself walking up and down stairs, slap some titles on it and call that a film. I don't see how you've got all this time for dating, talking into your recorders, not filming movies. Like when in these opening title cards, when you're seeing that everybody in this movie is a filmmaker, I expect to see a lot of hands and cameras. Cameras and hands. I don't see any in this movie. I see people talking at a monitor and talking into their phones. That could be anything. They could be making their grocery list.
Though. I mean, the actual of the 1 year and 8 months that we spent on this movie, actual filming dates were maybe 10 days. What do you think, Alia?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of writing, a lot of editing, a lot of spending time with the monitor.
No, but you're talking about making one film.
Yes.
The types of characters that are being described here are allegedly so prolific that they're churning out like dozens of films a year. I don't know about various,
only Allison's character in the previous reality, in the previous dimension, also probably in this one, because we didn't really discuss it. But there is a 20 or 30-year-old several filmmakers who've done over 100 movies in the real
right.
world.
And I'm sure if I were to go and visit them, they wouldn't be, if I were to make a documentary about their life and follow them around, I would see them, or even a dramatic interpretation of their lives as struggling filmmakers, I would see them filming something. I mean, yes, again, we see Allyson with the selfie stuff in the stairwell, but that's about it, except for I guess maybe that's you filming her on the bed or reading or whatever is going on there. And I don't even know if that's even real or dreams.
My interpretation is that, yes, those are Allison's movies. That 15 minutes of walking up and down a stairwell, or a half an hour of her reading on the bed or sleeping, because she even says that. So the way I saw it is, yes, her movies are absolutely like they're ridiculous. They're silly.
Right, that's true. Go ahead. You cut out.
I mean, that's just my interpretation. It's sort of like when you watch a movie or you read a book or do any look at any piece of art, it's all about kind of taking it for what it is.
Okay, so Ian, to edit a movie, you have to have a solid plan, right? So my plan generally was the black and white footage that we see of Allyson. And this is, I mean, this is just for you to know. After the, your reaction is valid. That's what you saw. All good. So when editing the movie, I had to have a solid plan as to what we're seeing at any given time, right? So the black and white stuff that we see in this movie, that's Allyson's footage, either the stuff she shot on her own camera or the stuff that Rene shot for her, right? So that's one type of footage. Anything that has dialogue, by and large, is in the main dimension, which is green colored, of the movie. A lot of the visuals where we see glimpses of Allyson and Rene, a lot of those are from different dimensions, including the main dimension. So that's 3 types of footage. What other types are there? The backward talking scene, obviously that's a different dimension because we don't, people don't talk backwards in the main dimension. And the walking backwards, that's dream sequences that help Rene solve, come up with the conclusion that he comes up with. So I think there's 5 different types of main visual, realities that we see in the movie. But like something like 70 minutes of that is in the maybe 60 minutes, 60, 70 minutes is in the main reality. So if we were to cut out everything else, it would be Rene talking, right? That's in the main dimension. Rene and Rene getting the gig. Rene and Allyson talking. Rene and Chitrapati talking. And then the conclusion of the gig. So if you cut out everything else, the story would still work. That stuff happens in the main reality. I mean, in my view, that's how I was able to keep things separate to edit it.
Okay, I mean, I still, the filmmaking part. I mean, I think I still stand by that. I'm like, it's kind of like having a comedy about people who work. They're bakers, and they're so tired because they're just baking all the time, and we never see a stick of butter. In the entire thing. But on top of that, there is this 10-point plan, and this is one of my.
One more thing. I may do a movie where Allyson is making a movie, so watch out for that.
Is it going to be called Slow Romance 3? It's about time.
Slow Romance. Allyson makes a movie. Slow Romance. That is one of the ideas that's working, because that could be fun.
I would love to see it. I'd like to see the kinds of ins and outs of that, especially because your character talks about wanting to make films that are kind of oddball and off kilter, because that's what you like to see in art. That's the kind of art you like to make. And it would be nice if they're, to do something that's not in the mainstream. And yet you're kind of in a roundabout way end up describing the movie you want to make, but that movie was made, it's called Swamp Thing. And it was made into like there's sequels and TV shows. But I want to get to this 10-point plan to end world poverty, because in the previous movie, this was one of the things that we had talked about. I wasn't sure if you were kidding when you were saying that, there was a financier of some note who gave you $100 million. And one of the title cards at the end was fast forward, 20 years or however long, poverty had ended worldwide. I'm like, how does that work on $100 million? It sounds, nice to think about, but it's not.
That could be a separate movie also. Just focusing on the ending the world poverty, that project.
Right. But I mean, in this movie, you fleshed it out, you attempt to with the 10-point plan, but I'm listening to the 10 points, and you helpfully bulleted those out. But, some of them are, fund more independent films in the United States, fund more independent films abroad, open up more art house theaters in the United States, open up more art house theaters abroad. I don't know how that ends world poverty,
I would have
because,
to do a more detailed breakdown.
well, but I'm saying, like, in the film, I don't want you to send me a more detailed breakdown. I
And yeah,
want
it could be a separate movie
Right, but
in the future.
again, you're laying this out here.
Sure.
I am watching this movie,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking, this guy has a 10-point plan to end world poverty, and it involves opening movie theaters.
hmm
Now, either the movie records scratch and the
Mhm.
film becomes about that to explain itself,
hmm
or you leave it out. I mean, as far as I'm concerned,
And
because I'm sitting there thinking, like, this, none of this, again, it doesn't make sense. It's not sustainable.
it doesn't
It's
make sense to you, but it makes perfect sense for the story and the characters and to me and other
well,
people that,
but
that
okay, let's pull over a second and just talk about. I want to know, like, one or two of these points, like, how does opening up independent movie theaters across the world help end world poverty, especially when, we've talked with the Lemleys
Mhm,
during, we're one pandemic away from having to close, or streaming revolution,
mhm.
from having to bring seven, decades old family movie theaters down to one.
Things are changing. With the success of the new movies, Barbie and Oppenheimer, a
But
lot of theaters are going to stay in business. A lot of people are making money. So, so
Well, but but in the reality of the film, you
sure,
talk about, there is a scene where you're talking to the filmmakers writing the book, and she's lamenting that theaters are closing, and
right.
then she talks about how she bought a movie theater
Mhm,
and is showing your movies there.
mhm.
And I don't know, she looks all about 23 years old. I don't know if this is old money, or if she somehow got a book deal or had this really successful independent film, but even her
It's not,
character seems to be contradictory, and there's no kind of explanation for it.
no, no. There's a lot of young-looking people who own theater businesses. Any economic activity, if you look at how Japan and Germany was rebuilt, any economic activity helps people get jobs, helps people overall helps the economy.
Well, I'm not talking about the post-war boom of World War II. I'm talking about
You know,
2023 United States, a failing business model of movie theaters.
mhm.
She bought and you can't tell me that movie theaters are not dying. We're coming out of a pandemic that wiped out a whole bunch of theaters, and Oppenheimer and Barbie, they're not going to help the indies. That might help
They
keep
are helping
AMC and the
companies.
that might help keep the AMCs
Mhm.
and the Regals afloat for a little while, but I mean, tell me
Indies
how
are
that
running
trends.
Oppenheimer and Barbie.
I'm sorry, what?
Indie theaters are running Oppenheimer and Barbie, and they are helping those theaters right now.
Okay. I'm gonna have to take your word on that,
Yeah,
because I don't kn
look at what's showing at the Lamley theaters. They showed both movies and they did really well. Also, lots of other small theaters because of lack of good art house titles, they had to book those movies.
Okay, so let's talk about that, the lack of good art house titles. The
hmm
types of movies that you're talking about, not even talking about making in the film, because you've got the swamp monster thing, the romance you're talking about is an idea. But let's just say that the types of movies Allison's character has made are her reading a book on the bed, or, cat vamping through stairwells,
Andy Warhol type movies,
Andy Warhol type movies. How is that going to make enough money at an
not
independent
those,
theater
not those.
to help? Well, again, what kinds of movies is she making that is going to,
She's not.
be
Her movies are
successful?
not going to solve the economic problem, but opening theaters would.
It,
Opening how?
Wait, we can't hear you, Aaliyah.
okay,
All
can
right.
you?
Okay. No, for a minute we could. One more time.
All right. My explanation for all of this is that we simply are existing in a world where all of this is normal. And that's part of what's funny about it. Like, this is, to me, this is an absurdist comedy like the last one, like Werewolf Ninja Philosopher. It's not meant to be taken too seriously. None of the plans that the characters talk about or the things that are happening are meant to be interpreted deeply. They're all just like in this world. Yes, big audiences are going to flock to a movie of Allyson sitting on a bed. That's why it's funny. So
and you know, the greatest film of all time now is like an Allyson movie.
Is
It's
what?
not gonna sell a lot of tickets, but it's you know, the number one film in the BFI list that we did a show about, the Chantal Ackerman movie.
Right, but that doesn't translate to people actually, watching it or
I
going
know,
to pay
but
for it.
you're connecting two different things. Rene doesn't say he's going to show Allison's movies worldwide to end poverty. He's talking about opening up theaters as an economic activity for parts of the world that needs it.
Okay, but here's the thing. Parts of the world that need it, are those parts of the world that need it going to be able to sustain,
Yes.
do they have the disposable economic income? Are you talking about opening them in the third world? Are you going to be able
Third
to
world has a lot
sustain?
of rich people. What are you talking about? I mean, there's some of the wealthiest people live in the developing countries.
Do they not have movie theaters there?
They do.
Movie theaters, right? Okay, so what are we
Use
talking about
more.
here?
They can use more. U.S.
Can th-
has U.S. has maybe a saturation of movie theaters. Lots of other countries don't. There's
are
space
they
for
do they have, and you would probably know this more than I do.
more.
But do they have what is the film market like in, some of these places you're talking about as far
In-
as the
India is
film
huge.
scene?
India
Okay.
is huge. Africa's huge. Lots of
I
Asian,
understand that. I mean, like India has a giant booming film industry. Do they need more movie theaters?
of a different type. Yes, I mean one of the things that happened with foreign cinema, and this happened after World War II in Europe. They didn't have American movies for a long time. So soon as the war ended, there was lots of business for American theaters and movies in Europe. In the same way, right now, American indies and even American mainstream stuff is not really well distributed in places like India, various African countries, Middle East. So
Let me push back on that a little bit. I mean, I've been talking to, folks in India about, cinema, and they get our big blockbuster movies. They're very popular there.
not widely distributed like they are here. They could probably use 10 times more, 100 times more.
What, theaters?
Uh, Theaters and access. Yeah, I mean, India is a huge place.
I understand that, but again, I'm talking about if you were to open up 100, 10 times more movie theaters, do you have the local economies to sustain opening up 10 times more movie theaters?
Sure. I mean, in both the real world and in the world of the movies, it works. I mean, in the story of Alison and Renee's world, one of the, maybe all of the dimensions, they end up helping to end world poverty. Maybe that would have to be a separate movie on all its own as to how that happens.
Right. Again, we keep going back to it's another dimension, things are different there. None of that is laid out in the movie. So all I can do is take it on its own terms, and on its own terms, it just feels like there's a lot of stuff that can be explained. Like you're gonna have to hand out like notebooks and cue cards and diagrams. If
Separate
you're talking
movies.
about if this is a mainstream accessible movie as you're putting it, I'm not there with you.
Okay,
Um,
good. It doesn't work for everyone. As even mainstream accessible movies made by Hollywood don't work for everyone.
Fair, I guess. So
Lost Highway was released on like 3,000 theaters. It was a wide release. It lasted a week. A lot of people didn't get it.
right, and it became a cult film, but I mean that's also a David Lynch joint. So
That,
that's a
but the company, the studio that made it thought, yeah, this could work. I mean, it works for me. I mean, there is some weirdness towards the end, but most of it works. Check it out.
yeah. I mean, it's David Lynch. That goes without saying.
But kind of a
Um,
normal one, far different than something like Inland Empire. I mean, this was
right.
It's like I don't know if you've seen it. It's mostly normal with some weirdness towards the end. It could have worked. It just didn't. Maybe they just didn't want to keep it in theaters for too long. Pulling it after a week, that's not that great.
Well, yeah, I mean, studios don't tend to pull movies because they don't want to keep them in theaters. They tend to pull movies because no one's showing up to see them. I mean, look at something like Blue Beetle, or that made $25 million this weekend. I don't think
good?
that.
Does the studio think that's good?
No, it's terrible. It's the lowest opening for a DC movie in this year.
That's a bizarre take, right? Back in those days, they kept back in like '94 or whatever when that movie came out. This movie's needing to make 50 million on the opening weekend wasn't a thing.
No, I mean, that's true in terms of those numbers, but the scale has always been true
Yeah, you
because
have to make something to keep going.
right, because yeah, to you, to me, $25 million is a lot of money, but you're talking about the movie cost 125 million to make. The theaters get half of that. Plus, you've got at least the amount of budget for the film to market it. So
Mhm.
you're talking about $250 million that the theater is going to get a quarter of that money, and you open at 25, it's a flop. Now, the economics of that are very sad and distressing. You're like, oh my God, we only made $25 million. Give me those problems. But
Yeah,
that is
yeah,
the reality of the situation.
yeah. I don't even know if those numbers are even real because Hollywood says they make X amount of money, but they're not paying their unions properly. When the producers go to collect the money, the movies have suddenly lost all the money.
Yeah.
So I have no idea about the Hollywood numbers. I think they have two sets, one for publicity and one for actual business.
So yeah, let's open more movie theaters and subject them to that
But that doesn't mean
system.
that in the world of Rene and Allyson that doesn't work. I mean, if you step back and look at the film industry as a whole, worldwide, it makes a gazillion amounts of money. Even now, even after the pandemic, it makes like something like $40 billion or more. Could be a lot more actually. 40 billion, yeah, could be a lot more. And
Well,
that's bigger than the budgets of many countries. I mean, the annual budgets of many countries.
sure. I mean, the economics of movie studios and Hollywood is a whole other conversation. But, it's like you're saying, the numbers are all kind of fuzzy and weird. To say that Hollywood took in or, made $40 billion or that was their output last year, that doesn't mean that that's how much profit they made. That could
Sure.
be the output. That's how much they spent on movies, yada, yada, yada. As we just talked about, you could spend $250 million in a movie. It makes 25. So you've actually lost whatever that difference is.
Yeah,
But anyhow,
but if you have 3,000 movie theaters throughout the country and 10 people, 20 people each work at each thing, they get paid throughout the year. Something like 6,000 people, 3,000 times 20 is like 60,000 people, right? So that's why I'm talking about the small scale influence or effect on the economy that the film industry have. So regardless of what the bigger numbers are and how much of that is profit or not, if 60,000 people throughout the country are making their living working at movie theaters, that's significant.
well, that also depends on if you're going to be able to sustain yourself working in a movie theater. I mean, if you're talking about a minimum
Some
wage
people do.
job,
People do.
well, if you're talking about a minimum wage job, which is like 15, let's call it $17 an hour.
Right.
I mean, you're not going to be getting, $25 an hour to be an usher at a movie theater. It's just not happening. Those are not necessarily
That's
made
sure.
for sustainable, like I'm going to, build my nest egg, ushering a theater, right? But on top of that, going back to our Blue Beetle discussion, if you increase the number of theaters and they're all showing the same thing, but no one's showing up for them, are you talking about a 30 screen multiplex like they have
We're
out here? Or are
we're
you talking
talking
about like a 2 or 3 screen house? And if one of those movies is Blue Beetle and nobody shows up for it, then,
we're talking about a world where they use theaters in part to help end poverty. If this could be a separate movie. So we don't go into too many details in the Time Travelers movie on that issue. but we go into a little bit more detail than we did in the previous one.
I will grant you that you have a 10-point plan
Yes, that's
as
an
far as
improvement over
that
the previous one.
right, but well, that's yes, that is improvement in terms of, yes, you added detail, but those details making sense really only in the concept of another dimension only adds further complication. I would say that's a detail negative.
Well,
But again, that's
it
my
works in any
perspective.
dimension. That's my view.
Well, all right, let's wrap this up and
Sure.
tell us, we are on, well, we're just about over an hour here, so Cosmic Disco Detective Rene, The Secret Society for Slow Romance 2, The Mystery of the Immortal Time Travelers. I
Yes.
got the order mixed up, but I got the title right, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
It's on VOD, right? So tell us where people can see it, and for how long, and what are the plans for after that?
Sure. And yeah, so check out the movie, check out Alia's performance and all the wackiness, multiple dimensions. See if Ian is correct, see if it makes sense, or see if it doesn't. And yeah, maybe we would have to do 5 movies to explain, the Time Travelers movie. So, Cosmic Disco Detective Rene, The Mystery of Immortal Time Travelers, The Secret Society for Slow Romance 2 is now available as a limited VOD from Vimeo VOD. You can go to Vimeo and type in Cosmic Disco Detective Rene, or Ian will most likely have the link below.
Oh yeah.
And that's available now until September 20th. No, September 14th, 8/29/14. $4.99. You can rent it for a week and go watch it slowly and make a diagram of all the dimensions. That'll give you hours of activity.
And post your favorite diagrams in the chat below. I want to see
Yeah.
these. I want to see these theories and drawings.
Yes, and then the next availability will be theatrically in LA at Lamley Glendale. It'll be running for 7 days in late September. And when that's happening, I don't think I'll show it anywhere else. After that, we're going to do myself, and Jamie Toth, the film reviewer, and anyone else who wants to join. We're going to do one virtual screening a week, like Saturday night, followed by a Q&A discussion afterwards for anyone who's watching the movie. And we're going to do that for 52 weekends once we begin in like late September, early October, for about a year, as an experiment to see how that goes. See if a bunch of people discover it, and see if a bunch of people show up. See if virtual screenings with Q&A can work as a thing, as a positive thing for indie film distribution. On top of that, there's some festivals that are interested, some theaters that are interested, so it may come out. So over the next year, 1 year plus, the movie will start popping up at various places. After that, it'll be wide VOD, like Amazon, iTunes, probably Google Play, etc., etc. But for the first year, if you go to nycfantastic.com, you will be able to get all the info on where the movie is at.
Awesome. And so
Does that all make sense, Ian?
That all makes sense.
Okay, good.
But you have kind of teased through this conversation other films, and even talking about the third dimension or whatever, or the third incarnation of these characters. What can you tell us about what you're cooking up, and when do you anticipate? Is it going to be another 20 months? Because I know you're devoting a lot to the Indie Discovery film series, and also to like getting this VOD and the weekly kind of viewing parties set up.
Mhm.
So what do you got in the hopper as far as your next project?
So we did one movie in 2022, one in 2023 so far. So next, I want to move to doing a movie every 3-4 months, the way Hong Sang-soo does it. So the next movie we're going to make, it's in one dimension, and it'll be a simple story, kind of like Pulp Fiction, but not multiple dimensions, like the Rene movie. We might see little glimpses, visual glimpses of other dimensions, but it's both Rene and Allyson are detectives. There's a drug that's been brought from the future that's creating problems, and there's a UFO cult that's creating problems, and there's a story about an older film critic. So those are the 3 cases stories, cases that the Rene and Allyson characters will have to deal with. I think the visually it might have a 70s punk type approach, kind of a mix of philosophy plus some, some punk looking, trashy looking looks. So it'll be different from the other two, but it'll be in one dimension and easy to follow.
Okay. Don't do that on my account. I don't want to.
No, it's just the next idea. It's not about time travelers and multiple dimensions. So the film, each of the film kind of takes the shape mirrors the main subject that's happening. Slow romance was like My Dinner with Andre. Time travelers are like time travel movies where you see lots of dimensions, and sometimes. And the next one is going to be like a sprawling New York City crime story, but comedy, a detective comedy. That should be fun. So we're starting to work on that. We're going to talk a little bit about it after this discussion and plan out. Hopefully by end of October I'll have a script, and then we'll start making it. So it'll come out maybe next year.
Awesome. Well, I look, as much as I, had my quibbles with this film and we've hashed them out, and I appreciate both of you being patient and discussing these with me. You are still one of my favorite filmmakers, and I will be there for anything that you put out.
Awesome.
With great
What's
interest.
this one better than Godard's Goodbye to Language?
You texted me that question yesterday, and I did not respond because I'm not going to answer that question.
So it's worse than Goodbye to Language in your view?
Look, no, better or worse. Hey, as you say in your film and in real life, there is no bad film. It's just all perception, baby. Anyway, all right. So I'm gonna get out of here. I'm gonna let you guys go. Alia, thank you as well, and I'm very great. Best of luck on your art show. Hopefully, this leads to many other opportunities. That's really cool.
I hope so. An artist and an actor and to make music, and those will be the three things that I focus on. I'll be happy.
Awesome. And I'll leave a link. This whole description is gonna be like all links to your stuff, because I'm gonna include a link to your site, because I know you post a lot of your creative endeavors there too. So yeah. All right. Well, and Sujewa, I hope that in all of your busyness, the things that you have going on, maybe we can pull over and do some more IndieSeen episodes throughout the months, because I always enjoy those, and I've enjoyed this conversation. Everybody,
bring you in for one of the Q&A, virtual Q&As, maybe.
Certainly.
Yeah.
But yeah, everybody, thanks. Be sure to check out Sujewa and Alia's stuff. Links down below, as I've mentioned. If you like this video, please like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And yeah, until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thanks again, and take care.